Hi, and welcome to the show, where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today in the show, we have Michael Miyamoto. He is a cardiologist, and he wrote the Kevin MD article, Dealing with a Bad Boss, Lessons from Dr. Fauci. Michael, welcome to the show.
Kevin, thanks for inviting me.
We'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and your journey to where you are today?
Sure. I'm a cardiologist, a practicing cardiologist in Orange County, California. I grew up in Hawaii. I did my college and medical school training in California and then continued to move eastward. I wound up in Boston for my internship, residency, cardiology fellowship, and some heart failure and transplant. I was at the Mass General, and there was a lot of silent pressure to enter academia, end up as a division chief one day. But I also had very excellent clinical mentors there. And it was a tough decision, but I decided to go into practice and moved westward again. So it's been over 20 years. I've been practicing here in Orange County. It's been a very rewarding experience. I really enjoy taking care of patients. And cardiology is something I've been interested in ever since I was in college. So it's been a good fit. More recently, just kind of thinking about making a bigger impact in the field. I've begun to kind of expand my research activities, looking into more of the origins or basic nature of atherosclerosis in humans. So she take care of patients with coronary and other vascular disease all day. Thinking about the bigger picture of why humans seem to be so predisposed to atherosclerosis, and I've been involved in some interesting work with a team that has studied ancient Egyptian mummies, doing CT scans and finding evidence of atherosclerosis even in ancient humans, and trying to figure out the implications of detecting atherosclerosis even in people without presumably a lot of exposure to what we consider to be risk factors for vascular disease. And also some work that I've been doing with some very smart anthropologists and a large multidisciplinary team looking at some indigenous Amazonian populations in Bolivia, and finding that they have very low rates of atherosclerosis and atrial fibrillation, and using those observations to try to figure out implications for how to apply their situation to more generally to industrialized populations. So my focus, I think, is a little broader now than just taking care of patients, although I do that full time as well.
So that's an interesting cross-section between anthropology and atherosclerosis. So how did you get interested in that?
Well, it started with our mummy work and some of the connections that were made somewhat fortuitously with a group that had been studying some indigenous peoples for a long time, long before we were doing our mummy work. And the group, like I said, is multidisciplinary. We have anthropologists, physicians, radiologists, neurologists, infectious disease doctors, biostatisticians, geneticists. So these are very interesting calls that we have every other week. Really interesting ideas that people bring forward, ideas for further study. And everyone brings a really unique perspective to the questions that we're interested in exploring. So that's been a lot of fun.
All right, let's transition now into the Kevin MD article that you wrote. It's titled, Dealing with a Bad Boss, Lessons from Dr. Fauci. Now, for those who didn't read the article, can you just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
Another avenue that I've taken, about 10 years ago, I went to business school for my MBA. And the thing I've noticed a lot since then is that a lot of the lessons that we studied in business school revolved around organizational behavior and the way people operate within organizations. And I think much more than finance and accounting and so on, I really been impressed by how applicable some of these organizational behavior ideas are to the issues that we deal with every day in medicine, in our practice, in large organizations, and throughout society. So as the pandemic unfolded, and last spring, the televised White House coronavirus task force briefings were held. It was fascinating for me to watch this whole story unfold. And I realized that this was a very interesting case study, an organizational behavioral case study in the way professionals, very highly regarded professionals, may operate within organizational structures. And we can all probably think of times when we believe that we're much more qualified, more expert in a particular field than our boss. And yet we still have to operate within that organizational structure. And this was, I think, a very public example of this, where two very highly esteemed and distinguished physician scientists were on the task force for their expertise to help guide the country through this very scary pandemic. And yet they were serving under a boss that admittedly was nowhere near as well-informed or expert in the subject, and yet they reported to this boss. And so to see how they thrived or didn't, as the case may be, within this organization was very interesting. And I think we're seeing right now what happens when someone like Dr. Fauci really kind of deftly navigated this situation, and still, regarded as a very important kind of resource nationally and internationally in helping us based on science and medicine to get through this pandemic. And now his stature has risen even further with the change in administration. And on the other hand, the other physician, Dr. Birx, and not to pile on to her as her situation was very difficult, she was perceived as being much less forceful in kind of staying true to scientific principles and a little bit more accommodating to some of the misinformation that was emanating from the top. And we're seeing right now she's basically not in the picture anymore. And I'm sure both had the best of intentions, but the ability to kind of navigate this is, it's a delicate balance between thriving within the organization and being able to survive while staying really true to your principles. And I really respect Dr. Fauci for that.
Now, what are some specific techniques that you observed Dr. Fauci use to navigate through that difficult political situation and have him survive to his stature today under the Biden administration?
Yes, so I was very impressed by the fact that on the one hand, he was very careful not to be directly confrontational. There is sort of this temptation to really react defensively to some of the challenges that are made to you. There's this natural feeling by many physicians and scientists that they are the expert, they know the most, and everyone should defer to their judgment without question. So I think there were situations where he could have been much more kind of offended, confrontational, which wouldn't have been productive. And I think that's a reason why he was so successful. And on the other hand, he didn't back down when it came to, telling it like he saw it. And, based on his many years as a distinguished scientist, you felt like he realized and appreciated his duty to the public, to really do his best to spread the best, to kind of hand out the best information. And so, he's really respected for that. So I think he did a good job of balancing the two things, of being able to stay in his position, which is important because if he, was sidelined, basically he would have lost his voice. And at the same time, really do his best to give us the best information based on the best science. And I think that is reflected in the fact he was very successful and is now, the chief advisor to the new administration.
Now, you had touched upon Dr. Birx, who, compared to Dr. Fauci, didn't fare as well in the aftermath. Is there anything that you feel she could have done differently?
Yeah, well, again, it's easy to armchair quarterback, and her situation was very difficult. I think that she probably, in my view, would have been more successful staying truer to her science and medical background rather than going out of her way to kind of make excuses for some of the really questionable recommendations that were emanating from the top. And I think by being so differential and not really coming out a little stronger based on her scientific background, she lost some respect, which was unfortunate since her career was such a distinguished one. And then later, after the transition, coming out and saying, yes, this was difficult. I couldn't believe what I was hearing and so on. I think that really shows the internal struggle that was going on in her and in many people, I'm sure. But I think it was a little late to say something. And that, the approach that I think Dr. Fauci took was, in the end, I think was the right one.
We're talking to Michael Miyamoto. He is a cardiologist, and he wrote the Kevin MD article, Dealing with a Bad Boss, Lessons from Dr. Fauci. Michael, what are some specific lessons that physicians can use in their own organizations that they can glean from the trials of Drs. Birx and Fauci?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about that a lot. I think that as physicians, more and more we have people that we report to, people that we're accountable to. And in the old model, even before I became a doctor, physicians operated in small groups or as solo practitioners, and they were their own boss. A lot of the big decisions were made by the doctors, and physicians kind of translated their unquestioned authority from the clinical setting into settings outside of just the office, and that is, how is a practice run, what decisions are being made in terms of allocation of resources, and so on. But it's a reality that we all have increasingly bosses, so to speak. And there are going to be times when you feel like you know much more about an issue at hand than your boss. And that's natural, especially for physicians. We do bring a unique clinical perspective that I think non-clinical people will find very hard to fully understand or appreciate. But I think we have to kind of avoid this mindset that, it's either our way or the highway. I think we really need to acknowledge the fact that we have to operate within these organizations, and we have to really pay a lot of attention to doing so in a way that's productive, and keep in mind that we're all kind of aligned in our interests. And with that in mind, I think that we make things a lot more collaborative, and I think physicians would do well to kind of look at things with this kind of organizational behavioral lens rather than just problems and challenges that need to be solved, ad hoc. So, I think generally physicians are becoming better at navigating this landscape. We're not taught it very well in medical school. We have rounds with the attending, and we all listen, do what our senior resident says. We are working in teams, but I think that through experience, once you get out in the real world, it can be very different.
And my final question, what's your take-home message that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
Well, I think that medicine's changing. I think, physicians by and large are very ambitious, capable people. And so there are a lot of opportunities to do what you're interested in medicine. So, I still have a very active clinical practice. But I do writing. I'm involved in medical devices and this research more and more that I mentioned. So there are a lot of things that physicians can do to contribute, and I think that one shouldn't feel really constrained to any one particular activity, and it's never too late to kind of really branch out into other interests.
Michael, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.